Just checking the camera. Chukeb sir, is the camera on?
No, sir, it's not.
I cannot see its button.
1 second, let me make sure I have the settings right. So that's how everything is fine from my side. You have the control. Uh, we,
Actually, the camera button is not showing here.
hmm,
It
we can
says
we can see your screen,
give
but
control, remove. Where should it appear actually?
I think next to your. Let me see.
File.
Camera.
Just waiting for the camera.
Let me change the presenter over to me so I make sure that only you are
Okay.
not seeing it. Or 1 second.
Okay. Just waiting for some settings to take place. We're going to begin shortly. So viewers, we're just waiting for some settings to take place. We are bound to begin. I'm waiting for a go ahead from my admin.
Uh, Shehzad Sahab, I think you can go ahead and start the class, and I'll
Okay.
excuse me, I'll keep
Uh,
looking to see what
right.
the issue is.
Okay. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Dear viewers, welcome to another session of our Islam Study Circle. The topic that we're going to study regarding the Quran here is regarding the prophecies of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in the Bible. And after studying some of these verses, we will go on to study the text of a hadith and then, of course, a few verses from the Bible. So, starting off with our Quranic verse of the day, this is verse 157 of Surah Araf, which is the seventh surah. And this surah actually explicitly tells us that how Muhammad's name was mentioned in the Bible, of course, referring to both the Torah and the Injil, or the Old Testament and the New Testament. So the words of the Quran are الذين يتبعون الرسول النبي الأمي الذين يجدونه مكتوبا عندهم في التوراة والإنجيل يأمرهم بالمعروف وينهاهم عن المنكر ويحل لهم الطيبات ويحرم عليهم الخبائث ويضع عنهم إسرهم والأغلال التي كانت عليهم فالذين آمنوا به وعزروه ونصروه واتبعوا نور الذي أنزل معه أولئك هم المفلحون. So, viewers, a simple translation of this verse would be: those who follow the messenger, the unlettered prophet, whom they find described to them in the Torah and the Gospel, which of course refers to the Old and the New Testaments. He enjoins virtue upon them and forbids them to do vice. He makes good things lawful to them and prohibits what is foul. He relieves them of their burdens and shackles that weigh upon them. So those who profess faith in him, honor him, support him, and follow the light sent down with him shall surely succeed. So, viewers, one of the claims of the Quran here is that Muhammad was not an unintroduced personality. He was someone very well known to the people of the book. And the way he has been described here, the verse says, الَّذِينَ يَجِدُونَهُ مَكْتُوبًا عِندَهُمْ فِي التَّوْرَاةِ وَالْإِنْجِيلِ, that Muhammad has been mentioned by name in both the Torah and the Injil, which of course are the Old and the New Testaments respectively. And not only is he mentioned there, he is actually described the way he would go about doing his preaching and how he will actually be one of the last, of course, one of the persons who brings about the law of Itmamul Hujjah to its completion. Now, viewers, the Prophet Jesus, if you would recall in Surah Saf, has actually said that one of the purposes that he has been sent is to make a prophecy of a messenger after him. And the surah goes on to say, Ismuhu Muhammad. Ismuhu Ahmad, I'm sorry. So his name, Ahmad, actually has been mentioned, as this verse also says, in the Old and the New Testaments. And just to give you a small glimpse of how the Old and the New Testament mention him, let me just read out a couple of verses from the Old and the New Testaments, which will give you some idea that although there has been some corruption, some interpolation in the Bible, but in spite of this interpolation, the way Muhammad has been depicted in the Old and the New Testaments, it is so very clear that none else but him is implied. So this is Deuteronomy. The book of Deuteronomy is also called the Revised Canon. It was the final formation of the Old Testament, and of course it was revealed to Moses. And you can clearly see this prediction, which has been mentioned in the 18th verse of chapter number 18 of Deuteronomy. So it says, I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brethren. Now, of course, the word brethren is very important because it has been spoken of the way it has been said here, that, of course, the Israelites are being addressed. And the only brethren of the Israelites, of course, which can be well imagined, are the Ishmaelites, who was the other son of Abraham. So it says that I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brethren, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. I have read out this citation from the Revised King James, the New King James Version, and you can see how profoundly they actually tell us of the coming of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is, of course, Moses, who was way back. Uh, just to let you know how Jesus has predicted the arrival of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and of course, as I said, that his mission was specially to predict the arrival of a messenger after him, and he, as I said in Surah Saf, has been named after him, as been taken the actual name of the person who will be coming as the last messenger of God. So, just to give you a few glimpses of how Jesus has actually predicted the arrival of Muhammad. So, I'm going to read out a few passages. Uh, this is John, the Gospel of John, chapter 14, and it's actually verse 16 to 17. So, the words are, "And I will ask the Father, and he will give you another counselor to be with you forever, who will be with you forever, the Spirit of truth." So this is John uh, chapter 14, verses 16 and 17. And then in John chapter 14, verse 30, he says, "I will not speak with you much longer, for the prince of this world is coming. He has no hold of me." And then again, in the same book of John, the Gospel of John, chapter 15, verse 26, it says, "When the counselor comes, who I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth who goes out from the Father, he will testify about me." So, as I said, the basic purpose of this particular Quranic verse is that Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is an introduced personality. He was not someone who was unintroduced. He was very well known to the people of the book. And precisely because of this, you see, the Quran at a number of instances says that they actually recognized the last prophet. They knew he was the person depicted in their scriptures, and they actually kafaru min ba'di ma arafu, as the Quran says, that they denied the prophet in spite of recognizing him, in spite of being fully conscious of the fact that this was the prophet who was being depicted in their own scriptures as the one who is going to come. So the charge sheet which actually the Quran presents against the people of the book is not that they had any confusion regarding the new messenger, or they had any doubts regarding his coming. The Quran actually says, "Yarifunahu kama yarifuna abna'ahum," that they actually recognize him the way an estranged father might recognize his son. So, such was the clarity of the people of the book regarding this. And this is why actually you can see that the Quran seethes with anger. The Quran is, you find the Almighty really annoyed at the people of the book for deliberately denying someone who had been mentioned that he would come. And this prediction, as you can see, here specifically has been mentioned that the Old and the New Testaments would be the ones in which his name would be mentioned, he would be described. There are several other citations and quotations, which of course you can look up if you study Surah Saf and some of the other verses, for example, the last paragraph of Surah Fath, in which again a very important citation has been made. But my purpose here is just to refer you to the fact that one of the important areas in which we find that Bible history has been interpolated is these prophecies regarding the coming of the last prophet. These prophecies have been tampered with, these prophecies have been given an entirely new interpretation, a different interpretation by our Christian brothers and our Jewish brothers. But if you study these predictions in the light of this Quranic verse that Muhammad is found, allazina yajidunahu maktuban indahum. Maktuban indahum, it means that his name has been written. It is found in the Old and the New Testaments, and the words here are indahum fit Tawrat wal Injil, both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And similarly, this is something which we all know that even before that, earlier prophets also have depicted the arrival of the last prophet. And we know that the prophet Abraham himself actually supplicated before the Almighty to make them the torchbearers of the last message of God when he said that raise a Muslim ummah from amongst them and raise a prophet from amongst them who should be assigned to teach the Sharia to them and to teach al-hikmah to them and then do their purification and purify them. So you can see right from Abraham until Jesus, all the prophets of God have actually depicted the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad, and specifically Jesus has said that his mission is to depict the arrival of the last messenger after him. And clearly, this can be something which we can today present to our Christian and our Jewish brothers, that this is how the Quran has presented itself, or the last prophet has presented himself. If there are any issues, if there are any discussions, of course, these discussions need to be made in a friendly manner. We should sit down together to try to resolve our differences and remember that we are basically the torchbearers of the Abrahamic traditions. We are the three major religions which have sprung from the Prophet Abraham: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. All three are basically the offshoots, or we can say the basic tenets which are revealed in these three religions are ones which Abraham has was the forerunner of. So this is a very important area of the Quran, and it is hoped that if you find time that you would study it. That Prophet Muhammad ﷺ has been depicted in the previous scriptures. He was an introduced personality, and if the Jews and Christians of the time of the Prophet denied him, it was out of no confusion. It was a deliberate denial. It was an intentional denial, and that is why the Quran has promised a lot of painful punishment for them, not only in this world, in the times of the Prophet himself, but in the hereafter as well. Let me now move on to the next section of our study lesson today. And this is basically a hadith that we are going to study. And I have labeled it as refraining from showing off. Now, this hadith has been taken from the Al-Jami al-Sahih of Imam Muslim. And the words are, عن ابن عباس قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من سمع الله به ومن رأى الله به. So Abdullah ibn Abbas stated, anhu stated that God's messenger said, he who does good deeds to have them publicized, he who does good deeds to have them publicized, God will publicize his humiliation on the day of judgment. And he who shows off, God will make an example of him. So, my dear listeners, my dear viewers, this is something which is ingrained in our own human nature, that when we have achieved something, or if we have a prominent trait, we tend to have this urge to show it off to other people so that we can win acclaim, so that people can praise us, so that we are able to flaunt our attributes and our qualities before other people. And the purpose primarily is to impress them and to overawe them and to tell them that we are superior in many respects. So showing off, of course, and being pompous or ostentatious, this is something all of us know is goes against basic human decency. If we have some qualities, if we have some traits, of course, the best person or the best being to impress them with is the Almighty. And that is that we use those traits, we use those skills, we use the wealth, we use whatever we have been given, which makes us proud of, for the cause of people and those around us. And showing off, of course, something is a form of arrogance, and it's a form of making ourselves feel superior to others, and it's this superiority complex syndrome that we often find in people around us. And of course, narcissism is another offshoot in which we find this self-praise or sentences which actually are meant to glorify our own achievements coming out of our own mouths so very frequently. On the other hand, the Almighty wants us to be humble. He wants us to be unassuming. He wants us to be down to earth. Because whatever skills, whatever abilities, whatever traits we have are basically entrusted to us. They are an amanat from God. They are given to us by that superior being so that we can use these skills, these traits for the benefit of humanity. And it's not that we have earned them or we are their beneficiaries because we are entitled to them. Of course, this would be an extremely wrong conclusion. These are basically entrusted to us. They are given in our custody by that supreme being so that we can use them for the benefit of humanity. And if we, instead of using them for the right cause, start showing off or bragging about them, then we would be flaunting or we would be misusing these traits and these abilities which the Almighty has given us. Being humble is actually a recognition of the fact that we are human beings who can falter, who can err. The only great or the only superior, supreme being is the one and only Almighty. As far as we are concerned, if we keep an eye on our own faults, that I think would be sufficient to make us realize how uh, how very unearthly we are, and at times we make ourselves appear as if we are very superior. But if we keep an eye on our faults, it will make us realize how uh, how down to earth we should be, because with all the faults that we have, perhaps the Almighty has covered our faults, the Almighty has not made them public, but we know what we are from inside. And if we know what we are from inside, we should not actually think that we are superior human beings or that anyone else is someone who is superior, who is inferior to us. And as far as the fact is concerned that who is superior and who is inferior, this is something which is for God to decide. As far as we are concerned, we have to remain His humble, dutiful, and down to earth servants. And if we are able to realize our place, if we are able to contribute to the society that we live in, this would be a job well done. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now move on to the third part of our study circle, which is the Bible verse that we are going to study. And this Bible verse has been taken from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter number 5 and verse 4. So it says, "Happy are those who are sad, for they will be comforted." These words actually by Jesus have a very significant import, and that is that if people are deprived of certain things, or if they feel sad in this world because of the fact they don't have the same amount of blessings as some of the rich people or the affluent people have, then they need not worry, because as far as their own future is concerned, it does not depend on wealth or riches or the amount of things they have or the assets they have. It depends on their own deeds. And this is what this verse says, that they will be comforted. In other words, if in spite of being deprived of many blessings of life, they continue with their good deeds in adverse circumstances, in trying circumstances, in trials, they show patience, they show gratitude, they still thank God for whatever they have in spite of being so miserly, they will be compensated. And this is precisely one of the reasons that we need to understand that the hereafter exists. Uh, if the hereafter does not exist, this world will make no sense, especially the injustices, the intolerances, the oppression that we find here has absolutely no justification. People who are pious, people who are virtuous, find themselves at the bottom of the society, find themselves in very trying circumstances, and other people who might be extortionists, who might be dishonest, we find them that they are placed at a very high ladder in the society. This, of course, does not make any sense if there is a creator of this world, because if there is a creator for this world, he has to be a just creator. He has to be someone who meets out justice one day, and precisely here arises the need of the hereafter. And Jesus here has very aptly told us that if you are deprived of something, if something has made you sad, Don't worry, because you shall be comforted. And of course, this could be somewhat of a glad tiding, not only in this world but also in the next world. In any case, because this compensation is bound to take place. If the Almighty tries and tests us, He, of course, will compensate for the trials, or for the things that we have been deprived of, or for the trials that we have gone through. For example, people who are born handicapped, they have certain handicaps. They could be blind, they could be deaf, or any other deformity. So, of course, they will be compensated for all these things, and compensated much more than they can imagine if they pass this test. So, my dear viewers, we need to realize that this world that we are going through is actually a very, very strong and a very firm test that we are put through. And if we pass this test, then the compensation we will receive, and the reward that will be received, would certainly be beyond our imagination. And I do pray, and all of us do pray, that we are eligible and worthy of this reward for showing patience and gratitude in trying circumstances. So, dear viewers, this is all as far as the first section of our study circle is concerned. Uh, if there are questions, we will take these questions. Otherwise, we will go to some of the misconceptions that we generally study. I can see Asir Zahur. You want to open your mic, Asir? Yes, please.
Hello, hello,
Yes, could you speak a little louder, please?
hello. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
Walaikum assalam.
Sir, two questions. Sir, number
Okay.
one, say in the verse that you mentioned, Allazi yajidunahu maktuban indahum. So this means mentioned by name or just mentioned, not depicted.
It of course means mentioned by name. That is implied, but it does not. It's not just confined to be mentioned by name. It actually tells us that uh, besides his own name, his attributes will also be described.
Right. So because
So
because
those,
mentioned by name, then obviously you could have chosen those particular verses which have either Ahmad or Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned by name. That would have
you
been, I
see,
think.
this is how the interpolation in the Bible has occurred, that they have actually
Right.
changed the exact name, and
Right.
we have a lot of discussion going on, for example, in Greek language, because some of the earliest manuscripts were in Greek in the New Testament, and we have Paracletus, for example, as the name, which translates roughly some equivalent to what we think. And then we have some other names like Munhamanna. So these are discussions which linguists, experts of the language often do regarding the name of which might actually would have been written. But at the moment, the way things are, this does not occur the way we think it should have been, and it is here that we think that this interpolation has occurred. Otherwise, as far as the attributes which are described besides the name, even if the name is not mentioned, the attributes, you see,
Right.
the words, as I just read out, that the Almighty has said that I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brethren.
Mhm.
And so
Right.
Moses, he is addressing Moses, the Almighty. And we know that Moses was a prophet like Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, as the Quran
Right.
itself has mentioned in Surah Muzammil. So,
Mhm.
although they have been successful in erasing the name, but the manner in which he is mentioned is so explicit, is so precise, that any person who has an eye for all these things, he just cannot escape the fact that actually Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is being not only mentioned through his attributes, but perhaps the name itself was there, and the
Right.
name has been erased, but the attributes are so very pertinent to the name that none else but his personality is the one who is implied.
Right. So my second question is, when the Quran mentions Ya Ahlul Kitab, for example, you said people of the book. So does it only mean Jews and Christians?
Yes, in the context of the Quran, the people of the book refer to the Jews and the Christians because they were the ones who were given the book of God, of course, referring to the Old and the New Testament. And since the Old and the New Testament have a special significance in the scriptural history, so therefore these are the two denominations which are addressed. And actually, if you view the 7th century scenario of Arabia, the people of the book were only the Jews and the Christians who were present there. Remember, in one of the last sessions we have studied that the Quran actually addresses those denominations, those religious people who were present right before them in Arabia at that time. And only the Jews and the Christians were the people of the book at that time. So even though there were other nations who did receive a book. For example, we know that David was given the Psalms, and of course, followers of Abraham were given the scripture of Abraham. So, although they were people of the book as well, but in the context of the Quran, since the Quran speaks to the people of Arabia, so we can clearly determine the fact that since in Arabia it was Jews and the Christians who were addressed, so therefore by the word people of the book, it's only these two denominations that are actually implied by this expression, Ahlul Kitab.
Right. Right. So the reason why I'm asking is this because specifically in relation to Hindus, their
Right,
holy books, for example, in the Vedas, it is scholars now say that who've studied the Vedas, they say that Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has been mentioned by name
right.
in the Vedas as well. So,
Yes,
so this is
mhm,
only purely because of the context that the Quran only refers to Jews and Christians.
right. That's it.
What you meant,
Otherwise, of
right?
course, we do know that the Vedas, of course, and some of the other scriptures, there has been a study. In fact, a lot of people have studied some of
Yes.
the other scriptures, and they have come up with many other prophecies which are so close to Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And although that's a reality in its own sense, but in the context of the Quran, of course, they are not implied. As I did explain in one of our earlier sessions, that the Quran actually refers to the people of the book who existed in the times of the Prophet himself.
Right. Right. Thank you, sir.
So, do we have any other question, or I think we should move on? Okay, let's move on to the misconception part that we study regarding the Quran or some of the other areas. So, the misconception, my dear viewers, that I would like to discuss today actually relates again to one of the misconceptions regarding the Quran itself, and that is that we often come across the names of the Quranic surahs, and lo and behold, if you start noticing that a name has very little to do with the content of a surah. So this might be some sort of a revelation to you, but the next time you pick up the Quran, read any surah, except for a very few surahs. For example, I can give you an example to clarify that Surah Yusuf is one surah which, of course, reflects what happened to the Prophet Joseph or the Prophet Yusuf, and this is one example in which a surah completely reflects what the title does say. But in many other cases, or I can say in most other cases, this is not the case. For example, Surah Baqarah. Baqarah in Arabic means a cow. So it is the small incident of the cow or cow slaughter, which is mentioned in the earlier part of Surah Baqarah. It hardly covers about 5 or 6 verses. And a surah which is 286 verses long and has only 6 verses related to the incident of the cow is being named as the Surah of Cow or the Surah Baqarah is something very strange. Now, viewers, the reason for this is that today, in our own times, the way we give titles to our books, to our articles, to our whatever we write, the general tradition is that it has to reflect whatever is said within the content. We don't have any example in which a surah or in which any writing would actually be of a sort in which the title would not reflect the content of that writing. So the way we human beings are used to writing, whenever we give a chapter a title or a book a title or anything that we write, if we give it a title, of course, what we mean is that the title is going to represent or convey something regarding the content. This, my dear viewers, is not the case with the Quran. And you can ask why. So the reason here is that, again, the Arabs, the way they would name things, or they would have this habit of naming written things, or the written word, or the spoken word also, would be that they would pick up something peculiar, something conspicuous, and then start calling that particular content by that name, by that small incident which would perhaps stand out. So the cow slaughter incident in Surah Baqarah is just a small incident, but because of the fact that it is mentioned there, so the surah began to be known by the surah in which the incident of Al-Baqarah, a surah allati tuskuru fiha al-Baqarah. So something like that would be the full Arabic name, that a surah in which the incident of the cow is mentioned. And then after several, of course, usages or stages of usage, this title was shortened to Baqarah or Surah Baqarah, or as the surah which mentions Baqarah. Surah Nisa, of course, is Nisa, we know means women, and one would expect that Surah Nisa, of course, one of another longer surah, almost 200 verses. The title should tell us that perhaps this is a surah in which a lot of things regarding women are mentioned. But again, if you study the surah, you'll find hardly about 10 or 15 verses, maybe even less, which relate to women. So a surah which is almost 200 verses long tells us whatever it is, the title is, but the title actually reflects only maybe 10 or 15% of what the surah says. This is another clear example that how the way Arabs would keep names of these writings would not be the way we keep names. And this also should be clear that these names were not never kept by the Almighty Himself. Of course, otherwise, I would like to also make a clarification, which just about as I finish this. But these surahs, which I have referred to, most of them have been named by the Sahaba or by later people, never named by the Almighty Himself. And the way, as I said, they named them was after either something peculiar. Another example is Surah Nur. So the Nur verse, Allahu Nurus Samawati wal Ard, again, which is about 7 or 8 verses, stands out in that surah. And that surah, of course, has several other topics which are much more important in nature. For example, the etiquette of intermingling between the genders, or the etiquette of gender interaction is found there. The incident of Ifk, in which Aisha radiallahu anha was accused of adultery, is also found there. So there are many other important incidents mentioned in Surah Nur, but lo and behold, it is called Nur, whereas we would have thought that it should have been called by something which encompasses the whole surah. But because of that light verse, which is present in the later part of the surah, it is called so. Now, besides this, there is another point that I'd like to make, and that is that there are some surahs as well in the Quran, and to be precise, 29 of them, which have actually been named by the Almighty, and they are the ones which begin with these abbreviated letters, or the huruf muqatta'at, like Alif Lam Mim, Ham Mim, Ain Sin Qaf, Taha, Yasin. So all these surahs, they begin by these abbreviated letters, or the huruf muqatta'at. These huruf muqatta'at actually signify the names or the titles of that surah. Why they have been named so? Of course, there is a certain theory which we can discuss some other time. But other than that, the fact that these are the names of the surah, and as far as the number of, we have a total of 114 surahs in the Quran. Out of these 114, 29 surahs begin with these huruf muqatta'at, and they are basically the names of the surah. So which have been given by the Almighty Himself. So, Surah, if you ask me the name of Surah Baqarah, I would say the name of Surah Baqarah, which was given by the Almighty Himself, is Alif Lam Mim. And as far as the names which were given by the Sahaba, it is Surah Baqarah. This also tells us that at times a surah has more than one name, it has multiple names because of the fact that people started to call them because of the fact that there were certain outstanding or conspicuous mention of certain things in a surah. So this is the thing that I would wanted to discuss with you. That when you study a Quranic surah, if you study the title first of all, except for the surahs which begin with the muqatta'at surahs, the rest of the surahs have more than one name. Of course, these muqatta'at surahs also have more than one name, but the other ones, especially at times, they have three or four or five names because of the fact that uh, of course, at times one of that name becomes more prominent. But if you look up the tafsir books, you'll find out that there are several names of a surah because simply some authorities thought that one particular incident is more prominent in that particular surah, and in some other authorities picked up another incident from the same surah and started to call that surah by that name. So please do make this mental note that as far as the surahs of the Quran are concerned, they have not been named keeping in view the content. That is the least concern of those who keep names, especially the names that were given later on. But as far as these muqatta'at are concerned, they are the names of the surah, and one of the theories of this is, which has been presented by Imam Habibuddin Farahi, that these huruf muqatta'at themselves actually are remnants of ancient alphabets, in which the alphabet itself used to represent something, some form, some structure, some entity. Thus, for example, Noon would connote the fish, and this is precisely why Surah Noon is called so, because we know the mention of the fish in Surah Noon. Noon wal Qalam, of course. Later on, the words are La takun ka sahib al hut. The Prophet is advised that he should not be like the Prophet Jonah, who showed this hurriedness. So, because of this mention of fish, the surah was actually called Noon. And there are other examples as well. For example, Taha. The word Ta in ancient alphabet connotes a snake, as Imam Farai has shown. And we do know that the serpent, the issue of the serpent is mentioned in connection with the miracle shown by the Prophet Moses. So that is why the surah is also named. So, and then we have surahs which are similar. Thus, for example, Surah Alif Lam Mim, Al-Baqarah, and Alif Lam Mim Al Imran, both are named as Alif Lam Mim because of the similarity of themes. Similar is the case with the surahs which begin with the word Hamim. There are 6 of them. And again, one of the reasons could be that they have something of a similar theme or some a particular similar aspect. Again, this is not an absolutely conclusive research, but this is one of the theories which has been presented by a premier scholar, that why these surahs have been named so. But as far as the fact that these are names, there is no, this cannot be denied that they are actually named of the surah. So this is what I wanted to actually bring before you today, that you need to realize that these names, except for the muqatta'at ones, have been named by the Sahaba or later people who came after them, and they do not, in most cases, reflect the content of the surah simply because this was not the convention of the Arabs. And of course, this was carried on regarding the Quran as well. So this brings us to a conclusion regarding this particular session of our Islam Study Circle. I'm now going to open the floor. So if you have any questions, please let me No, just raise your hands and I'll just unmute your mic. So again, I think I have Asir here. Asir, could you, your mic is self-muted. You have to open your mic.
Can you? Hello. Can you?
Yes, I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Sir, my question is, sir, about these harfe muqatta. Sir, uh, is there any authentic, sir, tradition or narration relating leading to the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which explains these letters? Is there a
Of
hadith?
course, had there been one, there would have been no dispute, but there is none.
All right. All right.
So if you
Thank
would
you, sir.
like to study more about this, you can study the foreword of Imam Farai's tafsir, which is now available, of course, in Urdu, and it has also been translated into English, most of them, most of the parts. So if you study the foreword of his tafsir, which has also been referred to by Imam Islahi, his student, in his tafsir, you'll find, of course, again in the foreword, or of course, in fact, while he was explaining Alif Lam Mim, the very first verse of Surah Baqarah, he has referred to Farahi into the Bure Quran and presented his view and said that although it's not very conclusive at the moment, why these surahs are named so, there is no dispute regarding the fact that these are named of the surah. But the question is that why are they named so? Regarding this second part, Sly has endeavored to put forth the theory of his mentor, Imam Farahi. And if you want to read more, you can just look it up.
Right. Because it leads to another question, sir. Then, if these are names, then obviously Allah in His divine wisdoms has done it. But but if these are names of the surahs, then why just 29? That's a it's a I think it's
This is
a
like if you allow me to make a comparison. You see, in our own genre of literature. We have poems which are which have titles, and we do have tracts, and we have literary passages which do not have any title. So, to give you an example from our Urdu tradition, we have the ghazal tradition. The ghazals do not have any title. On the other hand, nazm do have titles, and we have studied several of them. Similar is the case with some of the English language literary genres as well. But because you see, the Quran is basically it's a literary masterpiece, and whatever is reflected in the Quran or the way the Quran is presented is in a highly literary language. It's a literary tract. It's a literary piece of art, and it's very close to how we view literary things. So just as at times we do not name our literary tracts and leave them for the reader to decide or give it a title, in my personal opinion, this is how it has been adopted in the Quran as well.
right. And sir, can I ask you another question, sir?
Do you please go ahead?
Sir, it's about the sir. If one wanted to know about the, if I were to ask you how close or what exactly is the genre of the Quran? If it is a literary masterpiece, then how would
Right.
is there any particular
So
style that we could?
right. So if you ask me, I think one of our recent sessions, we did a detailed discussion on this particular, but I'll just give you a gist of that. And that is that the closest, very difficult to categorize the Quran as far as our own worldly genres of literature are concerned. But the closest resemblance is to a book of dialogues. So if you have studied the dialogues of Plato, for example, or the plays of Shakespeare, or the Divine Comedy of Dante, or
Dante.
Javed Nama of Allama Iqbal, so you'll
Mhm.
find out that there is a dialogue which takes place between various characters. There is a speaker,
Mhm.
there is a spoken to. The only difference is that in our human dialogues of these books, that we are used to, we write the name of the person who speaks, then we write a colon, and then, of course, the utterance follows it. So we know that who is
Right.
speaking to whom very precisely because the author has actually pointed out who the speaker is. The Quran is
Right.
very similar to that. It's basically a that divine dialogue which takes place between the Almighty and, of course, various denominations which are present in the 7th century Arabian scenario, and between those denominations themselves as well. And this dialogue is preserved in the form of a literary, I would say, tract. And the only difference is that the person who is speaking and the spoken to, they are not specified like the way we do. We write the name of the person, and then we write a colon, and then, of course, the utterance or whatever the passage is. Here we have to decipher the person who speaks. Often it is very apparent if we study closely, and at times we need to reflect deeply to find out that who is the speaker and who it is it spoken to. And then let me also point this out to you at this instance that actually you'll find that some of the disjointedness of the Quran or some of the jerks that we experience while studying the Quran are precisely because we do not give deference or due consideration to the fact that at one instance the Almighty is speaking to one group of individuals who have a set of beliefs, and then he turns his face, sort of, so to speak, or turns the direction of his address to some other group which is also present right there and starts
Mhm.
speaking regarding their issues or the problems or objections that they are facing or raising. So it's like shifting from one addressee to a second one and then to a third one and then back to the first or the second one. So many a time you'll find this address, this direction of address shifting from one addressee to the other one and then back to the first or adding a third one. So if we have this background in our mind, that basically it's a book of dialogues in which the speech is being shifted back and forth between various entities, it also accounts for the fact that how these jerks, so to speak, of course, people when they say that these we find things out of context, one of the reasons is that they don't realize that the address keeps changing between various addressees. And since each addressee has at times a specific, a peculiar issue relating only to that particular addressee, not to the other one, we find as if the discourse has drastically shifted. Whereas we can clearly see that this is no shift. It's just a shift in the person whom the Almighty is speaking, or between the entities themselves.
Right. Thank you, sir.
So I do not see any more questions. So should we end the session? So I have a hand raised from Rafia Khwaja. So yes, Miss Madam, you can go ahead. Or your mic is self-muted. Please unmute your mic. Madam, please unmute your mic. You have to unmute your mic.
I have been.
Kindly unmute your mic.
I am trying to do it, but
Yes,
is
I
it
can hear
okay
you
now?
now. Yes,
Okay.
I
Dr.
please go
Shehzad,
ahead.
I wanted to ask you about Yajuj and Majuj. I was reading the Quran and I couldn't really follow who Yajuj and Majuj were. Were they jinns or were they something else?
So, Yajuj and Majuj, which are actually called Gog and Magog in the Bible, if you trace their history in the Bible, you'll find out that Noah had three prominent sons. So one of them was Sam, from which the Semitic races sprung. The other one was Ham, from which the Hamitic sprung. and the third one was Japheth. So Japheth was the third son, and from him the Japhites sprung forth. So Gog and Magog are from amongst the offspring of the third son of Noah, uh, and they are actually not only leaders, but they are also tribal elders after whom the tribes themselves are named. So Gog and Magog are actually the offspring of the third son of Noah, and not only are they the two offsprings of Japheth, but by their name, whole tribes are also named. So when the Quran says Hatta iza futihat Ya'juj wa Ma'juj, it is actually referring to the races of Gog and Magog, to the tribes of Gog and Magog, which today, of course, are these Mongols, these yellow races, which are called yellow races by the Bible, these Chinese and these people from the Central Asian region. They are the ones who are the children of the third son of Noah and their offspring, Gog and Magog. So basically, they are tribes, they are races. And if you ask me who they are today, where we can find these races, then these Chinese and these Mongols and these yellow races, they are basically the offsprings of Gog and Magog. So Gog and Magog basically are tribes, and they are named after their tribal elders.
One more question. This is regarding doing jadoo. I think I asked you, when I understood that Allah sent these two angels to teach people to do jadoo, but at the same time tell them not to do jadoo. So it's very confusing for me.
So I think I did explain it to you that the Quran never said that they were taught jadoo or they would teach seher, as the Quran says. It says that they were given a certain knowledge, and by misuse of that knowledge, people would actually cause destruction among people. And as we know that they would disrupt family relations, they would disrupt relations between a husband and wife. So this was not these words per se, but a misuse of the knowledge given to Harut and Marut, and these were two angels which were sent down because in those times witchcraft and sorcery and magic was very common in the times of Solomon and earlier times. So they were sent to counter these occult disciplines, and they were given a certain knowledge which was meant to counter that. And of course, any misuse of this knowledge itself resulted in that chaos as well. So
So
these
they were
angels were
supposed
never
to counter the jadoo. They were
the
supposed to
magic
tell
and
people
witchcraft. Yeah,
what people were doing. They were supposed to counter and tell them this is
right,
wrong.
right, right.
Oh, okay, I get it now. Thank you so much.
So, dear viewers, I think we come to the end of our today's session, and inshallah, hope to see you next Saturday, same time. And I hope you enjoy this week. And till then, it is Khuda Hafiz and goodbye.
Khuda Hafiz. Thank you.
Hafiz. Assalamu alaikum.
All right.